Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication here at the University of North Carolina. Today's guests are distinguished members of the faculty here at the university who are comic fans or who use comics in their classes. From my right, I almost said from my left, we have Derek Hunt from the Regional Center, Dr. Rose Stremlow from the Department of History, June Power from the Mary Livermore Library. To my left, Dr. Michelle Fazio from the Department of English, Theater, and Foreign Languages, and Dr. Kevin Freeman from the Political Science Department. That's right. Thank you. Thank you for correcting me. Well, welcome everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting
I
us.
feel like a little bit of deja vu, but what I'd like to do is find out what comics you read, how long you've been reading comics, if there's any comic that's inspired you or that really sticks out in your mind. So Derek, we'll start with you.
Been collecting, like I said, since 10 years old. Have quite a collection. Pretty much it's we were just talking about it. I would collect 2 books, one to read, one to collect. So, and I've gotten rid of most of the ones I've read because they were trashed, and the ones that have been sealed and bound, some in airtight packages. So like I said, I'm sitting at about 27,000 is about what I have. Mainly a DC fan, never been a real big Marvel fan, except with the exception of Thor. I've always liked Thor, so he's in my collection, but Superman has been my mainstay. To me, I think the biggest event was the death of Superman, the way that was played up in the media, and there's been never anything like it since for anybody else that's died. But that's my mainstay.
Okay, well, we'll get along quite well. I'm a huge Superman fan, and although I don't really like Thor, unless it's Walt Simonson doing it. We'll go over here to my left. Kevin?
Sure. I started reading comics when I was probably 6 or 7 years old. My earliest memories were going to the Stars and Stripes bookstore on my $1 a week allowance and buying 4 25-cent comics without sales tax, of course. I grew up a Marvel fan predominantly. Iron Man was my favorite superhero for the longest time, but I also read Spider-Man and a lot of the other Marvel mainstays. I worked in comics retail when I was a struggling graduate student for years and years, and now that I've gotten older, I've moved away a little bit from superheroes, and I'm doing I read a lot of independent comics right now, and I'm actually the publisher of my own, of a small press publisher, Action Lab Entertainment.
You also are the author of Subculture,
right.
The omnibus that I have here in my hand. If people wanted to get this, of course, they could find it at their local retailer or perhaps online.
Amazon.com or at actionlabcomics.com.
That was a commercial plug.
That's right.
Rose, we'll come over to you next.
Well, compared to these two guys, I'm a relative newbie. I've been reading for about 8 years, and I actually married into this. My husband is a DC fan and has been collecting Superman books since he was little. And when we were still dating, before we married, our first Christmas together, he bought me a copy of Art Spiegelman's Mouse because he wanted to prove to me that graphic novels could be serious, intelligent, and beautiful works of literature. And although I hate to admit he was right, and that really excited me about reading historical works and those that deal with some of the more serious issues that historians really care about. And so since that time, I've collected many works related to not just 20th century history, but also independent works by American Indian, First Nations, and Aboriginal artists and authors.
Okay, so Michelle, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
I was an occasional comic book reader as a kid, but I didn't collect anything, and I just recently started collecting, I guess, compared to you, you all. I think I have maybe 10 graphic narratives. I'm afraid to say that, but I've really been reading The Walking Dead because I teach it in my class, and it's, I don't know, I guess I'm really focusing on that series right now because it's relevant to my field, but I've also been looking at some historical novels and like Rose, talking about social issues like race and class and sexuality. So I guess the independent comic book is what I'm after.
So you came to comics as an adult.
Yes, and the geeky part of this is that I went to an academic conference and saw literature professors presenting, and I didn't know you could have fun being a literature professor. So I said, well, I'm doing that. So I brought it back home with me, and so it's really about the past 2 years that I've, on my free time, explored this, and now it's in my classroom. So I'm learning from all of these wonderful peers of mine.
Well, thanks. Well, that's great. June, why don't you tell us a little bit about?
I grew up mostly a Marvel girl. I've been voraciously reading since I was very, very little. I can't even remember when I started to read comics. I was never a big collector because I think my librarian mojo was running even back then. I had a next door neighbor that he always got 2 of everything, so I would just borrow one of his copies. and then I would, give it back and borrow something else. And so I kind of got all my reading in that way. Huge fan of the X-Men back in the day. I think the only really DC character I kind of got into was Batman. I like the dark, twisted characters, Wolverine, Batman, Loki from Thor. I like the bad guys. Kind of got into, I love Der Spiegelman's Mouse, kind of got into some of the newer independent, historically and literature-based comics as I kind of got older and wanted to kind of expand my horizons. But I still like to go back and I'm reading the Walking Dead comics right now. They're awesome. I love the TV show. The comics are great. And I found a new great online comic called Masterpiece, and it's graphic novel parodies of works of classic literature. So if you don't want to read Crime and Punishment, the graphic novel version, so much better in my opinion. Pride, Prejudice, so much better as a graphic novel than actually reading the book. So I've kind of been dabbling in that a bit lately.
Well, you are also responsible for the library's collection of comics.
Correct. I help to manage that along with my fellow colleagues over there.
I'll just give you all the credit.
Well, thank you. I'll take it. But we do have a rather large graphic novel print collection and a huge anime video collection. And I'd have to say those are probably our most popular items. We check out more of those probably than any other kind of things that are going out the door. And we're trying to grow the collection. And I'm trying to do that in conjunction with, I'm also the advisor for the Genshiken Anime Club here on campus. And we're having our ChibiCon this Saturday, so that'll be really our third annual ChibiCon.
And that's open to anyone in the
That's open to anybody. Public? Come in costume, come not in costume. It'll be a great time.
And that's April 10th?
12th.
April 12th, okay.
Saturday, from 4 to 10
Okay, well,
p.m.
if you're seeing this before April 12th, 2014, please come down to ChibiCon. Now, the comics that we do have in the library, like you're saying, it's an eclectic blend. You have a number of, I guess, what would be the more popular books that, as they come out, whether it's the new 52 Batman. But you also have the Jack Kirby Omnibus from DC Comics, where it's a collection of his crime comics from the 1950s and his superhero work in the 1980s. And then you do have those more artsy style graphic novels. So are you looking to just get more books in all varieties?
We do. We like to have a diversity because everybody likes to read and look at different things, and so we want to be able to meet as many needs as we can. But we're always looking for suggestions. So if there's something that people find we don't have and they want us to have it, they're welcome to ask us to get it, and we usually try to make that happen.
Great. Now, Michelle, you mentioned that you use graphic novel, or you call them graphic narratives.
Yes.
In your classes. Is it exclusively The Walking Dead, or are you just taking other books?
No, I have been using other books. I've been using the graphic adaptation of Studs Terkel's Working, which I teach working class studies. So for me, I'm finding ways to look at how this new medium is taking a collection of work histories from the 1970s and bringing it to a mass audience. So that was exciting for me, but also with The Walking Dead, when I started reading it, I mean, I'm into zombies, right? Who isn't? It's fun stuff. But when you start reading The Walking Dead, every survivor introduces himself based on their former occupation before the apocalypse happened. So I started tracing this because that's what I do as a careful, close reader, and I started to see a pattern that Kirkman was developing. So what's happening for me in my studies of the Walking Dead is that these survivors are relieved that capitalism has ended. They have a purpose in life. It's to kill zombies, and it's more satisfying and less alienating than their world before the apocalypse. So that's kind of fun to teach in the classroom because it relates to our world today.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And so the books that you're choosing, how do the students react to this when they come into class?
The first reaction, they think I'm crazy because I'm like, we're going to read about zombies. And they're like, what? Why are we doing this? This is literature. And so I tell them in my field, there are major panels and publications. So I show them the research that's been done, and we read the critical essays, but also read the primary sources. So it's really about showing the technical aspects of the graphic novel and narrative. So how to read characterization, to read for mood. These are all important elements. This is a real thing that we're studying. It's not fluff. Right. So for me to teach students to closely read, that's an important skill for any undergraduate student to learn. So that's my focus. I'm not as well versed in the history, but I'm learning it, but close reading.
History doesn't mean that you appreciate the books any more or any less, right? Now, Rose, do you use comics at all in your you're teaching?
I do. I have been using comics in the classroom for 5 years now, and the book that I've used the longest is called Dawnland by Will Davis is the artist, and the storyteller is a famous Abenaki storyteller and novelist named Joseph Bruchac, and it's a creation story that beautifully manages to touch on almost all of the major themes that I cover in the first half of my American Indian History survey. So it's almost like these guys got together and created this book for me. And I love beginning the semester with it because it enables me to introduce important ideas so much more effectively than what I used to do, which is giving students a 30-page essay on theory that alienated half the class. They read the graphic novel and they get it and they're into it, and then I can assign the work of theory and explain how it relates to the story they understood, and it enriches the class, but it also, the students buy in, and I think that's the real benefit of using graphic novels, especially at the beginning of the semester, particularly when introducing new or different concepts that the students may not have been exposed to before. It's accessible, it's fun, and it's even just a tiny little bit deceptive because they don't realize they're learning until you've already got them in the process.
Right, it's a great way. In this class, we produce comic culture. The students of my BRD 1600 television production class are the directors and crew of this show. And what I find, I'll talk directly about you in front of you, everybody, is that because we're doing a show about comics, it piques their interest, and then when they see that we're able to bring in ideas from outside of the community, it really keeps them engaged in what we're doing through what can be essentially 30 minutes of standing behind a camera, making sure the shot looks good every few minutes or so. So Kevin, do you use comics at all in your teaching?
No, not yet, but I'd like to. There's so many. I do international relations as my field, and there's so many good graphic novels on international studies and things like Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, which is her story of growing up as a girl in Iran during the revolution. There's a creator named Joe Sacco who did a book on Palestine. He's done a lot of Middle Eastern studies with Israeli-Palestinian relations. Rutu Modan, who is an Israeli illustrator, she's done a lot of work on life in Israel as a Jew or things related to that. There's just countless numbers, and as a matter of fact, I've been talking to both Rose and Michelle about potentially doing a class that focuses just on graphic novels, either in fiction, politics, history, and then of course the English literature part of it goes with it as well. So it's something that we want to do, and I suspect that students would like a class like that.
We do read often that a lot of professors are bringing comics into the class, and at first there's always that skepticism about, gosh, comics in college, that just seems crazy, and yet hearing these stories, we're able to connect with our students a lot better because I guess it makes learning a little bit more accessible.
And if I may, I actually left out my favorite sort of political creator, and it's a fellow by the name of Guy Delisle, who's a French-Canadian, and he's done a lot of travel journals, for lack of a better term, and he did one on North Korea, he did one on China, he did one on Palestine, he did one on life in Burma. He travels a lot with his wife, who works for Doctors Without Borders, and so he illustrates sort of the goings-on in all of these parts of the world. It's fantastic stuff.
I feel badly because I do read a lot of superhero books, and you all sound so learned next to me.
Well, I just got through teaching Persepolis, and my students, one of the most remarkable comments this past week was how universal the themes were in the novel. So it's Iranian Revolution, and they're like, well, we didn't have this kind of revolution. I'm like, well, what's it take to actually organize and walk the streets? If the university gets closed down for 2 years across the country, you've got a lot of people not doing anything. So it was a way into a culture that they hear about in the news, but they really don't understand. Mm-hmm. So I love Persepolis. I teach it every semester just to open up that kind of conversation.
So now I have to read that.
Yes, you do. It's not about capes, just about capes and tights and all that stuff, right?
I think that's still a big part of it. I think it's really great to see the diversification, and I like to read the different bits of it, just depending on, it's kind of like, I pick my music based on kind of what mood I'm in. Sometimes I want something deep like Mouse, and sometimes I just want to read, Thor. And I think that with all the Marvel movies that are coming back now, we're seeing a huge resurgence in comic culture and in people being drawn to graphic novels for the first time that don't have that history. They weren't collecting when they were kids, and they're kind of just seeing it now because of the movies, and they're going back now to the graphic novels and going, wow, I didn't even know that this kind of print world existed, and they're really eating it up, and it's kind of nice to see that kind of retro thing going on as well.
Well, now, Derek, you've been collecting comics for a long time. I've been collecting comics. I remember when I was in high school, if you admitted that you read comics, people kind of looked at you a little funny, like, why are you reading comics? And you try to explain, well, there's a book called The Watchmen. It's this really interesting, it just went right over their head. So what are your thoughts as we see comics become more accepted? Are you looking at yourself as a pioneer or just enjoying the ride?
Well, you enjoy the ride, but I think what's been nice, and I'll go specifically to something new that's happened with DC. They've rebooted their universe, retold a lot of stories, but for the first time, I think they've taken a page out of Marvel. You now see for the first time that blurry line between being a superhero. I mean, if you go back to the early days of Superman, the Justice League, the Teen Titans, there was always this clear, defined of, well, we're this independent party. Everybody in the world welcomes us to come in and help. And I think now for the first time, you're starting to see, well, wait a second, I don't care if you're Superman or not. You're not on our borders. And then that person respects that. So, the real question is, I think, and that opens up dialogue, that if that existed in the real world and you were that powerful and you had that opportunity to change things, would you go into Iran and would you stop it? Would you do certain things to say, I'm going to correct this? And would there also be that fine line like we saw with the Watchmen where, hey, you work for the government. We're going to send you in. You're on our payroll, and you're going to do shadowy things, but in the public, you're still that good guy. And I think books have taken on that harder edge. And especially, I think DC took a long time to cross that line. I mean, you've seen gay characters. You've seen wife abuse. You've seen rape. I guess a couple of years ago with the Justice League, where a member was raped. So that was never, ever talked about 10 years ago. So I think you're seeing that we either embrace what's going on in culture or we continue to lose and people were not buying books. And we went through a big downturn where several companies went bankrupt, Valiant, Image, just the popularity was gone. But people want some realism. I want to read a little fantasy, but I want realism as well. So that's what I personally like. And I mean, I'll pick up a book just to see something different. I think we were talking about early, Archie getting killed. That we smile about it, but it was like, we always have Archie as this high school kid, but now all of a sudden it's like, wow, he gets killed, and it's been a big deal. I think it was in USA Today, it was on CNN, so people will go out and buy the books, drive up the price, a little capitalism in there, so we're all good.
Well, it's interesting because I think when last we spoke, we talked about Archie Meets the Punisher, which was a crossover they did about 10 or 15 years ago, Marvel and Archie Comics. And that was kind of a weird blurring of the lines. But if you take a look at the Archie line now, they cover a number of subjects. There's Afterlife with Archie, where Archie and the gang are fighting zombie hordes. There's the future episodes or issues. I think it's Life with Archie, where it's a future version, alternative reality sort of thing. Where he gets killed. Which is where, and we have Kevin Keller, who's the first openly gay character in the Archieverse, and they had the marriage issue. So we are seeing even Archie Comics is really making a statement about today's society, and in a way that
the new Miss Marvel.
The new Miss Marvel.
Who is Islamic.
Yes.
So we're kind of diversifying, and they're not all just the white guy with the cape and the shorts and the Speedo.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. Why do you believe female characters, women characters, have a hard time resonating with comic audiences? Kevin, I guess since everyone's looking at you, we'll ask you first.
I'm treading on dangerous water here because I don't think that they don't. It's not that they necessarily don't resonate, but and the demographics of comic readers is changing, which is good, but predominantly, and it's still true to this day to some degree, that it's adolescent males who read comics, and so these adolescent males have idealized visions of what women are, and that's the kind of women that they want to see in their comic books. So I hate to use the word sexualized, but historically it's been sexualized quite a bit, and I think that we're seeing some backlash against that now, which I think is a good thing personally. I mean, women superheroes are more now than just a busty woman in a costume. Now they actually have personalities, and they're involved in real life situations. So it gives them a lot more depth, which is good.
Very one-dimensional for the longest time. I felt, like you said, there was no depth to them. Just completely one-dimensional. Now they're being fleshed out and given these histories, And you're seeing a great expansion of the roles of the women in the group's dynamic as well, I think.
Well, that was the running gag in every issue of the Fantastic Four. You know, the Thing would fight Dr. Doom, and Reed would have to solve some puzzle, and the Human Torch would burn something, and the Invisible Woman would just be sitting in the background saying, "Oh!" And yet she was just as powerful. So I guess it goes back to the creators behind it as well. But we do see this new generation of creators. Mary Sue DeConnick, I believe, is the writer of the new Captain Marvel series, which seems to be winning audiences over both male and female. Will the library be adding that to our collection?
I will make a note. Because we would like to add that. I'd like to see that. And I think it's important, like the point that you just made, we're getting women writers too. You know, for a while there, you know, we had your Stan Lees, you had all these male writers. You didn't have a lot of women that were writing graphic novels and writing comic books.
And illustrating. That's
And illustrating.
because now you're seeing the characters start to take a more, how would you say, appropriate appearances, not the, oh boy, overabundance of everything of how does that actually work? How does she keep her costume
Going
up?
to run.
Yeah. So you have the women coming in and saying, wait a second, that's not what a woman looks like. Let me redraw that the way it needs to be drawn. So I think that's made a big difference.
And a great example is the new DC character that's being introduced, which I can't remember the exact name, but it's based on a young Cree activist, so a teenage girl, and the depiction of her, which was released a couple weeks ago, shows her in a very respectful regalia, very much like how she looked when she was powwow dancing versus the stereotypical depictions, which not just reflecting gender stereotypes, but stereotypes of American Indians, which were prevalent in comic books through the 90s. And so not just issues of sexism in the literature, but of racism. You know, really for American Indian authored comics and First Nations authored comics, it's been this last generation that it's not only that the depictions are more representative, but those people are actually at the table producing themselves, and you see them at the conventions, which that's a great thing, to be able to see a much more diverse group of people making and reading these books.
And we're breaking the stereotypes. Remember going back to like, you know, like Alpha Flight for Marvel. You know, if there was an Indian character introduced, it was like, oh, you're a shaman.
Exactly.
You're a shaman, or you had to call in the great spirits.
Right.
Now you're having characters, you know, in Green Lantern, you know, they brought in an Arab that is now a Green Lantern. So, and you're dealing with those, you know, issues with that. And I think there's just breaking down the doors of, if we bring a character forth, it's not just going to be, oh, okay, you're into this.
Right.
And I think that's, once again, it's important because your readership has changed.
Sure. Indians and women are no longer just sidekicks.
That's it.
That's
And they're
true.
powerful, and they do make a difference. I mean, Wonder Woman is now considered in some corners maybe more powerful than Superman. You know, so, well, that's it, you know.
We
Obviously,
all know that Jean Grey is like the most powerful X-Men, you know, not counting, of course, you know, the head guys, but
which is why she has to stay dead, of course.
that's why she had to go die and then she had to come back.
And ask for forgiveness. Now, we've seen a lot of movies based on comics, and I think a lot of our viewers are familiar with films like The Avengers or Captain America, but there have been a lot of other films based on indie comics that people might not think about, Road to Perdition or Scott Pilgrim Saves the World. Are there any movies based on comics that you're a fan of that might not be as well known?
Yes, Mystery Men.
Mystery Men.
Yes, I don't know if anyone's seen Mystery Men or not, but it's hilarious. You just have to watch it. It's one of my favorite comic book movies.
Well, the Digger might be one of my favorite characters.
The Shoveler?
The Shoveler,
He
I'm sorry.
shovels and shovels well.
I've got to hand in my card now because I got that wrong. But he's got a gift. He knows how to dig.
That's right.
You mentioned one of my favorite. I love The Watchmen. Love The Watchmen.
Ghost World is another good one. If anyone's seen Ghost World, Daniel Clowes, sort of magnum opus. It's been out 10 or 12 years now, but also a kind of a good indie tale.
I'm going to probably get slammed for this because nobody seems to have liked it. I love Constantine. I love that character.
As long as you don't say Catwoman.
No. Well, but I mean, it's a good character. I mean, he's a good guy at times. He's a bad guy. The movie was good. You know, whether you're a Keanu Reeves fan or not, you know, you just like the character. They're bringing it back to television now, so I'm looking forward to that. But I think that was a good. I enjoyed that movie. I've probably seen it half a dozen times, and when it comes on, I'll usually turn it on.
Well, they did a film adaptation of Persepolis, Oscar-nominated film,
Animated,
so
yeah.
it was beautiful. I showed it in my classroom, and the students had no idea. I think Ratatouille beat it out that year. Enough said about priorities, but
Well, Pixar, right? So.
yeah.
Let's even made it down to the children's level. I mean, if you look at the movie The Incredibles, I mean, even their, comic culture is even getting down into the Disney. Once it's Disneyfied, that it has become
And now that Marvel
ubiquitous.
is owned by Disney, I'm kind of hoping for a Incredibles Marvel crossover. I'd love to see it.
I'm looking for that, but I'm worried as well. It's kind of like when they brought Star Wars. You know, my heart kind of skipped a beat, and I was like, so I'm hoping for good
You
thing.
don't
So
like Mickey Mouse's Luke Skywalker?
yeah,
I think it's going to be great when the Death Star blows up again and it's got two
Mickey Mouse
two
ears on it.
Yeah. Well, another area where we're getting a lot younger people into comics are the animated series, whether they're on Cartoon Network or on one of the Disney channels. We have Teen Titans, which is a book that I enjoyed in the 1980s, being adapted as more of like a younger audience series where the characters are more, I guess, in that anime style.
Powerpuff Girls.
Powerpuff Girls. So are there any series that you've seen that you thought were a great twist on this genre?
Well, I have a 5-year-old son, and he loves the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on Nickelodeon, and it's done pretty well.
You must be so proud.
I don't know.
Now, has he tried to get a rat to teach him karate?
Not yet, but he also likes Beyblade, and so there's a balance.
Well, I have to say I enjoyed the Justice League animated series because I found that what they did was to take, seeing that we have about 1 minute left, so perhaps I should save that thought for another episode. As we're getting ready to close our show, first of all, I do want to thank everyone for being on the panel, but I'd also like to thank you, the audience, for sticking with comic culture during our second season. I'd like to thank all of our guests, Christy Blanche, Denny O'Neill, Chris Claremont, Robert Chambers, and of course, Hector Mireille, who came on to talk about his book, Faith in Fandom. And I'd like to thank everyone here for coming on the show. In the 30 seconds or so that we have left, if you had the chance to put a superhero on campus, what superhero would it be? Starting with you, Kevin.
Put a superhero on campus?
Just
Wow,
winging it right
that's
now.
an on-the-spot. I don't know, maybe Batman.
Okay.
I'm biased, it's going to be Superman.
Okay, well, it must be Batman or Superman. because
Wolverine.
Wolverine? Okay, well, I've been given the wrap-up sign, and we will see you again soon on another episode of Comic Culture. Thanks for watching.